somebody I met at McGill who
I feel
wants
like the
to,
caged lion right now too.
she's trying to convert grid data to GenPack, and I said, there's already a program that does that.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, everyone.
get her in contact with you.
Clock has
That's fine.
struck noon, it's high noon, and it's a pleasure to be here today. You'll be hearing today 4 talks from myself and members of my research group. We're based in the Nelson Institute Center for Sustainability and the Global Environment, but all of us have deep roots here in AOS. We are all practicing for the AGU meeting. So in line with AGU, we're going to keep some strict timekeeping. You'll have time for Q&A after each talk, and then we'll move on to the next one. So with that, I hand it over to Alicia Hoffman. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Should I wait for the, yeah. Okay.
It's this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, so as Tracy said, I'm going to be presenting a version of my AGU slides. And the reason I say a version is because I'm going to be providing a little bit more background today, just so we're all on the same page. Oh.
Yeah, green is
Okay, good. now we're on a microphone. So I'll be providing a little bit more background so we're all on the same page. So today I'll be talking about nighttime, the impacts of nighttime chemistry on daytime air quality. And this work is funded by the EPA. So when I'm talking about daytime air quality in this talk, I'm specifically going to be talking about something called NOx. NOx are sort of a collective name for nitrogen oxides, NO and NO2. NO2 is a hazardous air pollutant regulated by the EPA for a number of reasons, one of which is that it has negative human health impacts. So breathing in high levels of NO2 can lead to respiratory problems or cardiovascular problems. NO2 also can contribute to environmental damage. So NO2 can undergo some fun chemistry and form acid rain, and then you get all of the problems with acid rain and eutrophication of lakes and things like that. As I said, NO2 can undergo some fun chemistry, and some of that chemistry forms other air pollutants. So NOx can contribute to ozone, which is also a pollutant regulated by the EPA for its negative human health impacts, as well as environmental and crop damage. And then NO2 can form particulate matter, or particles, and impact their composition. So in addition to having negative human health impacts, particulate matter also influences radiative forcing and the climate. So for all of these reasons, it's very important to understand NOx and understand NOx chemistry. But as I said, NOx can undergo some fun chemistry and some interesting and complex chemistry, specifically at night. So at night, there are things called reservoir species of NOx that can build up. So these gases that are in red here are reservoir species, and that means that they don't actually contribute to the immediate concentration of NO2, but as soon as the sun comes up, they'll break down and form NO2. So if you have high concentrations of NO3 and or N2O5 at night, once the sun comes up, you can have an increase in daytime NO2 concentrations. On the other hand, if you have low concentrations of NO3 or N2O5 at night, they will most likely not contribute to an increase in NO2 concentrations in the morning. So knowing the levels of these nighttime species can be super important for understanding our daytime air quality conditions when we're out and about and breathing the air. So what's going on with these species and how do we understand what they're doing? Well, you can lose your reservoir species through a couple of processes. And as John Martin pointed out, one of the scary words on the title of my slide was heterogeneous. So at night, you can have heterogeneous chemistry. And what that is you have gas phase chemicals, so N2O5, and they interact with particle phase components of the air. So heterogeneous means gas and particle interactions. So one way to decrease your amount of reservoir species at night is by having N2O5 undergo heterogeneous chemistry and go into the particle phase. And then you have less N2O5 at night. Another way that you can decrease your NOx reservoir species at night is by NO3 reacting with various gas phase VOC products, or VOCs, and forming products. There's a variety of reactions that can happen, so I have not listed them all out here, just that there are many products that will result in decreases in reservoir species concentrations at night, meaning less NO2 is formed in the morning. So this complex chemistry is interesting because it varies spatially and seasonally. So the relative concentration of the reservoir species at night depends on where you are, for example, where you are spatially in the United States, where you are in altitude, and where you are seasonally. And so it's difficult to extrapolate the exact impact of nighttime chemistry on daytime air quality just using like one field observation, because that one field observation may not apply to everywhere across the United States. There are a number of field observations that have occurred, but many of them are discrete and are difficult to compare against each other because they have different measurement techniques. They've used different measurement platforms. For example, surface versus aircraft. You're at different altitudes. You're going to get different answers if you're measuring things at different altitudes. They they measure different species, and so they get different calculations for how you find the loss of NO3 and N2O5. So because of the difficulty in assessing the nighttime chemistry of NOx from field studies, I wanted to use a model to understand what was going on at night across the entire United States. So to assess the seasonal and spatial variability in nighttime NOx loss, I used the EPA's Community Multi-Scale Air Quality Model, or CMAQ model, over the continental, or actually contiguous United States. It ran it for January and July of 2019. The reason we did January and July is because that's sort of the two seasonal opposites, winter and summer. And then from these runs, I pulled out the loss of N2O5 at night and the loss of NO3 at night. So the loss of NO3 is calculated from the reactions with those various VOCs, and the loss of N2O5 is calculated from the uptake into particles, so that heterogeneous chemistry. And I separated out just the nighttime component. So that meant finding the average sunset time and then pushing it back an hour to account for dusk, and then adding up over the night to an hour before sunrise to account for dawn. So we get minimal amount of sunlight in the calculations for each loss mechanism, so that we're not overcounting loss or we're not discounting loss because of that sunlight impact on photodissociation. So we get interesting patterns of loss spatially and seasonally. One big thing to point out is that loss from NO3 is really big in the southeast United States, and that happens in both seasons. So places with a lot of biogenic emissions, so things from trees and plants, they will react pretty quickly with NO3, and so you get, in winter and in summer, a lot of loss of NO3 at night through these biogenic pathways. In contrast, N2O5 does not really have much of a loss at night in the summer. I realize it's a little difficult to see the color gradation on this. I don't know if it's better on the TV back there. But in the winter, we do see some N2O5 lost in the Northeast, along the Rust Belt, and then in major western cities in the US. But in the summer, we really only see N2O5 uptake happening over Lake Michigan, which is a very interesting area for a number of reasons. So it would be interesting to examine in the future how this N2O5 loss is influenced by lake breeze effects and other things going on around Lake Michigan. If we want to look at this in percent of NOx loss that's happening, you can see pretty much overall the NO3 loss dominates most places, especially in the summer. There's some fraction of the losses from N2O5, but in the summer, there's almost no loss that is nowhere in the United States is loss dominated by N2O5 uptake to particles. It's all through those biogenic NO3 channels, or VOC channels. So from this, we understand a little bit about what's happening, but we don't entirely understand the full impact of heterogeneous chemistry, this N2O5 uptake story. And that's because N2O5 uptake can be represented in models in a variety of ways. So I wanted to compare two representations of this heterogeneous uptake in the model. And so the previous examination of heterogeneous uptake included particles with an organic coating on them. N2O5 does not like organic coatings, so it's not really going to want to go into these particles. And that might have contributed to the very low levels of uptake that we saw, or loss that we saw, through the N2O5 channel. Instead, I did another model run looking at particles that had no organic coating and were just aqueous phase species. And N2O5 really likes being in aqueous phase conditions. It does not want to be around those organic coatings. It wants to go into these particles that have basically just water and aqueous species. So I predict that N2O5 uptake will be much higher through this aqueous phase channel. And as we can see from the modeling comparison I did previously, when we have a coating on our particles, that organic coating, it decreases the uptake of N2O5 on average by an order of magnitude. And that's a big difference. So how does this look in terms of loss? So on the left here, we have the difference in N2O5 loss, the difference from the no coating minus the coating, and everywhere it's red, meaning that everywhere that it's red, there's more loss to the particle phase when there's no coating. And there's no areas that are negative, meaning that nowhere has more uptake with an organic coating on it. And then on the right hand, we're looking at the percent of total NOx loss. So this is comparing, this would be going back to the percent with NO3 slide. And we can see that there is more orange now with N2O5 uptake using a no organic coating. So we do see more N2O5 uptake in the winter, still not a whole lot in the summer though. So the next thing I wanted to look at is how does this affect our daytime air quality? So I took the difference of nighttime NOx loss between the two channels and pulled out the daytime NO2 concentrations. And the first thing to look at is that daytime NO2, the difference between the organic coating and the no organic coating cases, they have a temporal difference, or they vary in time. So the difference between those two concentrations varies in time, and in January, the peak difference occurs at 9 a.m., and the peak difference in July occurs at 6 a.m. This has to do with sunrise for those two seasons, because that is when NO2 will be forming from the loss of N2, or forming from the reactions of N2O5.
Alicia, 13 minutes.
Okay. Oh, I'm at 13 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Last slide. So if we look at the difference of those two model representations of heterogeneous chemistry, we see that with the organic coating, you get more NO2 in the winter and very little difference in the summer. And this is because the organic coating means there is less N2O5 going into the particle, more N2O5 staying in the gas phase, therefore more N2O5 dissociating in the morning and forming NO2. And that is that. Last slide. Okay. Nighttime.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alicia. We have 2 minutes per AGU norms for questions. Yeah.
You calculated your losses in parts per billion, and I'm wondering if you have any idea of how it would look in a localized percentage. I'm wondering if there's like spatial trends in how high N2O5 and NO3 are, and if it's all relative contiguous events.
Yeah, so that's a super good and very interesting question, and it would be interesting to look at like a local percent of how much is lost because they're not constant across the U.S. In more polluted areas where you have, I'm going to go back to this slide super quick. So in more polluted areas where you have more NO emissions, you end up forming more NO2 and therefore at night more NO3 and N2O5. So in cities, I would hazard a guess that some of the reason that you see in cities like this N2O5 loss peak is probably because there is more N2O5 to lose in those areas. Yeah, super good question. Yeah.
So that has to do with the meteorology too, because Salt Lake City's a bullseye. I saw that more than once. And so
Yes.
you have low-level inversions and so on. You have
Yes.
less volume, more pollution, more N2O5.
Yeah, Salt Lake City
Okay.
is super interesting because it just traps everything right there.
Yeah, because it's surrounded by the mountains. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, Brad.
So on the NO3, it looked like you had a pretty big response offshore in the Pacific. And it's driven by VOC. What do you think's going on there?
So NO3 does react with marine VOCs as
Okay.
well as terrestrial VOCs.
Okay. And
But-
so there's enough marine VOCs?
Yeah, and some studies actually have found, especially along like the East Coast around New England, that marine VOCs dominate nighttime loss, or reactions with marine VOCs dominate nighttime loss. When you look at N2O5, NO3 with terrestrial, and NO3 with marine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, I'm done.
Let's move on to Haein. Thank you, Alicia. Up next is Haein Kim. Haein is a postdoc working over in Sage with me and Jonathan Patz, who does public health, and Morgan Edwards, who does energy. So it's a very interdisciplinary talk. Thank you, Alicia.
Hi, nice to meet you all. My name is Haein Kim. Thank you for the intro, Tracey. I'm a postdoc working with Tracey, Professor Tracey Holloway, Jonathan Patz, and Morgan Edwards. I come from the power systems analysis background, and currently I am looking at the air quality and health co-benefits of energy systems transitions. And actually, this will be my first time attending the AGU with the poster presentation on air quality and health co-benefits of residential heat electrification through AOS supergrid. So any questions, comments, I will definitely appreciate. I also look for any comment on what you find most interesting about this integrating approach, or what you want to hear more about to help you understand of this modeling approach. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the concept of Asia Supergrid, it's a policy initiative in Asia to integrate all Asian countries into synchronized electrical grid system. So all Asian countries can share renewable sources in remote regions to improve the sustainable generation mixes. But then what I have been studying in past years, I have been proposing a phased approach to Asia Supergrid. Asia Supergrid itself is a big infrastructure project that involves all Asian countries. So what I have been testing is the trilateral power trade between the large economies in Northeast Asia. So these three countries, China, Korea, and Japan, they are the major economies whose political will is very important in implementing this policy initiative. So I've been looking at just by interconnecting the regional power grids in China North, Korea, and Japan West, that still makes economic and environmental benefits. First, it reduces the total cost to meet the power demand in 3 nodes, and then it improves the renewable expansion and accelerates the carbon phase out as well. So without the renewable, like solar in Gobi or Mongolia, it still makes sense to interconnect these 3 neighboring grids. Shifting gears to the air pollution in Northeast Asia. Air pollution is a huge societal and environmental problem in Northeast Asia region. I assume a lot of you have heard of severe air pollution in China, but then you also see that the most regions in, across most regions in Japan, and entire Korea, South Korea, and China, the annual average concentrations of PM2.5 is far beyond the HWO guideline, which is 5 microgram per cubic meter. And it has adverse health and environmental impacts like respiratory diseases, reduced visibility, impacting the quality of daily life, and it also disturbs the metabolism of plants. So it is also evolving into the international disputes over like who's really responsible over this transboundary air pollution issue. Actually, all these three countries share a lot of challenges in their clean energy transitions movement. You see that both power sector and residential sectors have huge dependence on fossil fuels. In all three countries, based on 2019 data, more than 70% of power generated comes from fossil fuels. And then also in residential sector as well, a lot of homes are using coal, especially in China, and mostly gas in Japan and Korea. And you see that these two sectors is the main contributor to the emissions of many air pollutants, especially PM2.5 and SO2. So here's our research question. How about we utilize this power sector cooperation between three countries to power the residential heat transitions? So basically, we are removing fossil fuel consumption for residential heating and adopt electrical heat pump systems. And then we power the transition through the Asia supergrid. So by providing cleaner electricity to residential heat transitions, it may create synergies in multi-sector pollution reduction efforts. Why is this important? The residential sector emissions are attributed to greater uncertainty due to lack of activity data and lack of understanding. And also solely fuel combustion in residential sector has higher emission factors, but then in many studies, residential sector has been overlooked, probably due to like data availability, but also relatively small contribution to the national emission inventories. And scattered coal especially is still being used in China's residential sector for heating, and that's known to cause a lot of air pollution in China as well. So here's our research objectives. So we are integrating two analytical tools. First, power system model, and then second, air quality analysis model. So we divide the study into two parts. First part will focus on the power sector analysis, and the second focuses on the air quality analysis. So first part, we quantify the power trade impact on low carbon transitions in both power and residential sectors with heat pump adoptions, and assess the grid scale response to residential heat pump adoption. So basically, like how much peak increase is gonna incur. And then second, we're gonna assess how power trade affects the peak response and then generation mix. So this is about how the grid interconnections is gonna really provide cleaner electricity and then improve the system stability to respond bigger demand. In the second part, we quantify the air quality and health improvements. First, we examine the sectoral contribution to air quality changes for residential sector by removing the remaining fossil fuels for residential heating up to 2050. And then for power sector, we expect to see further air quality improvements from clean energy generation. And then second, we're gonna assess the spatial distribution of air quality and health benefits from these transitions. Okay, so this is our modeling framework to link power, air, and health analysis. So it has three columns here. First examines the power system model, and the second is about the air quality, third is about the health impact analysis. So basically, for power systems analysis, we use a linear optimization model to minimize the total cost to provide power for three demand nodes. So using the existing generation and storage capacity and the cost information for different technology options, this model basically decides the least cost combination of technologies to provide power in terms of capacity expansion and then dispatch schedule. If you're not familiar with the concept, dispatch schedule, this will be the hourly power output by different technologies. So it determines the fuel consumptions in power sector. And then the air quality analysis part, we use the GAINS model. It's the acronym for greenhouse gas and air pollution interactions and synergies. It's developed by EASA. So we use this power systems results for consumption and fit it to the GAINS model. So GAINS model uses the fuel consumption in all sectors and calculates the national level emission inventories using emission factor and also in consideration how much control technology is going to be used. So we can apply different policy assumptions here as well. And then based on this, it's going to compute air quality indicator such as annual average concentration of PM 2.5 and also health indicator like number of premature deaths.
Haein,
Yes.
your time.
And then for the health impact analysis, we're going to compare with other exposure response functions to see the robustness of the health results from the GAINS model. And the major interlinkage happens here by feeding the power sector result, especially the fuel consumption, into the GAINS model. So did I use all 10
So you
minutes?
have, like we said, 3 more minutes, but that's Q&A.
Okay. So then let me spend 1 more minute on the research part. So this study is still in progress, so I'm presenting the preliminary results. So grid interconnections, we do confirm that grid interconnections do provide a cheaper and a cleaner electricity for residential heat transitions. And then we've tested high impact regions, China, Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei regions for air quality changes. Compared to the base case, we see that the annual average PM 2.5 concentration decreased by 5 to 15 microgram during the study time horizon. And then we expect to see that China has the largest contribution to the Northeast Asia regional air quality improvement. But then the benefits actually maximizes when older countries adopt clean heat options through grid interconnections.
Thank you. We have time for Q&A? Yes?
Hey, great talk. And I'm not familiar with this topic, but I have a small question about the modeling aspect of your talk. Is that because there are a lot of factors going into the model, is there any way you are introducing, or the model introduces some sort of uncertainty to all the parameters to give you a range of output, or is it not the case? I'm just curious.
Yes, for power sector analysis, we do a lot of sensitivity analysis, especially regarding different levels of carbon prices to affect the relative cost competitiveness of technology options between countries. Also, renewable availability, because nuclear availability is definitely one concern for the region. So we test different levels of nuclear availability. And lastly, we also test the maximum volume for the trade flows. So in this model, we limit the maximum trade volume to be under 20% of nodal demand for energy security concerns. Because for many countries, they are, one of the reasons they are hesitant for starting this is the energy security concern. So we test different levels of maximum trade volumes between countries.
Thanks.
For your point number 2, I'm just really surprised that with a complete phase out of fossil fuel, for the national total, the improvements could be as low as 1%. Why would it be that low?
So for 1%, I didn't talk much about the baseline case. So the baseline case we are adopting is called STEPS. So that assumes the implementation of existing energy policies as of 2020. So it already assumes the implementation of energy policies. And what we are trying to do here is the additional complete phase out compared to the existing policies plan.
So we are at time, but I'm glad to know this has sparked some interest, and Haein, of course, is here on campus and happy to help. But just to keep things moving, thank you, Haein, very much. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. Alicia, where are mine?
Yeah, here's our,
If you just close
Thank you. Okay.
do you want one of us to keep time, or do you?
No, I think I can keep it. That's great. Hi everyone, I'm Tracey Holloway, and I am talking today kind of in a pivot. I'm not talking about research that we're doing exactly, but more thinking about broadly how, in general, can the climate, air quality, atmospheric science community better interface with public health. And this was an invited e-lightning talk, so it's actually going to be only 3 minutes at the AGU. I'm expanding it greatly by about 5 minutes today, but I'm kind of your little like a palate cleanser before the final talk of our session. I should note that actually this session is called Effectively Using Climate Data for Health Applications, and it is chaired by Yoon Han, who was a recent alum of the AOS department. She worked with Tristan Lacuye for her master's and her PhD. And then she did a postdoc in public health at Emory University, and now she's a recent professor in public health at UT Health in Houston. So she herself really migrated from this room and AOS very firmly into the air quality community, into the public health community. And at the AGU, there's a session that has started maybe over the last 5 to 10 years called GeoHealth. So this idea of connecting the traditional geoscience, atmospheric science community with public health is a growing area of interest to Yoon, to me, and I think, perhaps to some of you. So when most of my work is really focused on air quality, chemicals in the air that affect public health, affect ecosystems, affect crop yields, and affect climate. And when we think about how to take scientific tools and data to support air quality, there are a lot of options. One are in situ measurements, especially from ground-based monitors, also from flight campaigns and SONs. There are atmospheric models developed across scales and at varying levels of complexity, and satellite data. And you'll be hearing in our next talk about our work leading the national team for NASA to make satellite data more relevant to public health and air quality. Linking data with this major scientific challenge, of course, are the scientists. But, and already within our community, I've covered a lot of ground. But this is only part of the full picture of interested parties when we're thinking about public health and air quality. Not only do we have the scientific data and tools, but we have private sector organizations interested in tech, like the group that was just bought by Google that puts air quality on your cell phone. We have members of the public. We have community groups advocating for change. We have nonprofits like the Sierra Club. We have government decision makers. We have state level agencies. This is the logo of the National Association of Clean Air Agencies. We have regulated industries like transportation and power. And really, that is just the tip of the iceberg. If we're starting to talk more broadly about health, it's everybody from the fire service to your city health department. And so when I think about how to make the connection between the science and all the different groups that could possibly use it, it's kind of a daunting challenge. But we've come up with a few strategies that tend to work pretty well. One approach is to ask partners what they need and then do that. And it's a pretty straightforward approach to developing scientific research, but actually works very well. Like when I was developing my proposal for the NASA Health and Air Quality Applied Sciences team, I reached out to the American Lung Association, who I'd already been trying to build a relationship with, and they were interested in how to use satellite-derived PM 2.5 data for their rankings of air quality. So we did that, and this was led by Colleen Heck, who just graduated from the Professional Master's Program here in AOS, and we're working on prepping this for submission. Another strategy is to identify what are the natural barriers that users outside of our own field might have in working with our data, and then try to lower them. And a good example of this, and I apologize, I put these slides together too fast, you can ignore the text, which, again, this is practice. But this is, so a good example of this is work that was developed by Alicia Hoffman, who you just heard from, and a recent PhD student, Gesayanji, who also did her master's in this department, where they've developed tutorials to take anyone with no programming background whatsoever and get them up to speed on using Python for NetCDF, satellite data, model analysis. And actually, these have already been used by users all around the world, from the CDC and MIT to international users in a wide range of institutions. So when I think about what are the do's and don'ts for connecting with the health community, one issue is to consider if you want to connect to the health community. And if you do not, don't worry about it. Go about your business. If you do feel, though, that this is something that you want to do from a career perspective or a research opportunities perspective, try not to be too hung up on the values of your disciplinary community. Because typically when you're doing work in a different discipline, you start to make connections, and then sometimes it can be viewed as too applied or not as exciting as some of the work of the people who you may normally hang out with. Another issue is to build connections with health partners. And if you find a good fit, nurture that relationship. It really takes a lot of time and engagement to grow effective partnerships. Don't, though, try to convince every partner you meet about how valuable your work is. Because what you want to do is you want to find a partner who is a good fit, not trying to feel like you're always trying to sell somebody on your work. When you do meet these new partners, you want to ask questions, listen, and learn. You can invite them to kind of drill down. You don't need to assume that they want to see all of your plots and all of your data from the jump. You can let them kind of explore and get to know your work. And finally, you want to be prepared to learn new tools and data and concepts, but don't feel the need to become an expert in every other methodology. Really, we found that these partnerships work best when we have deep expertise that is coming together to solve new problems. So thank you very much, and I think I have about 30 seconds for a question. Yes?
So is there any collaborations happening between the UW hospital people and Nelson Institute on projects about air quality and health?
Yes and no. There are people from the UW hospitals who are affiliates with the Nelson Institute and who are doing work themselves. And I think this idea that I wouldn't say that the Nelson Institute is the convening body. I would say that the audience for this is all of you. I think the real question is, are any of you working with the UW Health Department? And I think you could be, you know, and I think that's really the question, because the Nelson Institute is sort of the glue in many ways, but I think that there's this real question. A lot of, or especially early career people, are interested in making these connections and they don't know how to. And I think, you know, one of the reasons why one might is that it could double your potential for faculty positions or funding or things like that. So I think there's some sort of strategic and practical reasons beyond just personal interest, but not for everybody. Okay, Jenny, you're up.
Okay, well, that was a great lead-in. Can't expect something better than that for ADU. Hello, my name is Jenny Bratburd. I am the Outreach Program Manager for the NASA Haein program that Tracey leads, which I'll be talking about shortly. And today I'm going to be talking about strategies for building dialogue and teamwork, hopefully building off this great start that Tracey got for us in the health and air quality applications of Earth observations. So for me, my background is actually in microbiology, so when I started this job, I didn't know anything about air quality, and I certainly didn't know what Earth observations were, which is a term that I feel like is common for NASA and other space folks to use for their observations of the Earth with satellite data. And this image is just showing the huge amount of the whole constellation of satellites that are collecting data, and also some of the future ones that are planned. And even since the couple of years that I've been working on this, there are more, and there's so much exciting data out there that people can use for really remarkable applications for air quality and health, as previous speakers have mentioned. But the question is, how do we get that data into the hands of people to use it? And so this is where the HAECAST team comes in. So HAECAST stands for the Health and Air Quality Applied Sciences Team. And the mission of HAECAST is to connect the NASA science with air quality and health applications. And this team has been running since 2011. It originally started as ACAST, the Air Quality Applied Sciences team, and then health was added in 2016, and now we're on kind of like the third generation of this. And the team structure is, we have 14 PIs, including our team lead, Tracey, who each bring their sort of individual project and stakeholders or group of stakeholders. And we also have over 60 co-investigators, 20 ambassadors that I'll talk about in a minute, and hundreds of other stakeholders. And the work that the team does is sort of three main categories, I would say, that help with different needs. So one is those member projects I just mentioned. So the individuals kind of compete and bring in these individual projects that they work on over the course of this team for 4 years or so. We also have sort of shorter term, highly collaborative team projects that we call our Tiger teams, where we draw on different members of the HAECAST team, along with stakeholders on year and a half projects focused on a specific issue that affects a lot of stakeholders. And finally, we also have outreach, engagement, and rapid response projects to help with stakeholder needs that are much more short term or sort of general training, stuff like that. So for me, for outreach, I love working with all of the stakeholders in this area. They're so delightful, and it's a lot of fun. So like Tracey was saying, if you're interested in health, I would just say they're a lot of fun to work with, along with the air quality stakeholders. So one of the things that we did in this generation was to really elevate our stakeholders with a program called HAECAST Ambassadors, to sort of highlight the folks who are committed to using NASA data and willing to serve as liaisons to their communities. And so that's the 20 folks on this slide, which includes people at state air quality agencies, regional agencies, federal, EPA, Department of State, National Park Service, health organizations like the American Cancer Society, Cleveland Clinic, as well as private companies. So there's a range of different users of this data. Some of them have been working since the very beginning of ACAST. And with this ambassadors, this is an opportunity for us to really go into a deeper involvement with them, to regularly get feedback, and then also sort of highlight them and their successes and their uses of the data. So we try to get users engaged throughout the research project process, including with our Tiger teams, especially, are a great example of this. So you have probably heard about co-production, and what that looks like for the Tiger teams for co-producing research is sort of they're involved in the creation of ideas. We also specifically ask stakeholders to review the proposals to make sure that we're really getting the proposals that stakeholders want, and not necessarily what the researchers think is the best idea or whoever else. They also get very involved in the operations of this team and are ultimately receiving the deliverables. And I think this is a really great way of always inviting people in and creating those opportunities to get their input, so that you don't get to the end of a project and say, here's the data, do you like it? And find out that's not what they need. We also hold twice yearly public meetings, which we try and make different from maybe a more traditional academic conference, in that we invite speakers, and half of them will be stakeholders and half of them are academic speakers, and we sort of structure these panels so that they're shorter talks with a long time for Q&A and discussion, to really get that spirit of collaboration. And these are some quotes from folks who have attended our meetings, from stakeholders, and also the data providers and researchers. And I don't have to read all this, I'll just summarize. to say that it's kind of a unique environment to get a lot of these different groups together who may not otherwise have a venue to overlap. And for the stakeholders, it's a great way to get them to think about how do we operationalize this, how do we get this data into our regulatory work or into our advocacy work, whatever that need is, and make it as scientifically defensible as possible. And for the researchers too, it's a great opportunity to see how their data will be used, how they can make it more accessible and easy for stakeholders to take up and run with, which I think would be really satisfying to see your data out there in the world. So I'll give some examples of a couple of projects we worked on. We had Jennifer McGinnis, a research intern in the Holloway Group, working on these last year, and now she's at Colorado State. So one of the daunting things about working with satellite data is that there's so much of it. There's so many different instruments and different products from those instruments, so it's hard to choose which data set you want to work with. So we developed this flow chart, which I'm just showing an excerpt from, to help kind of guide people with the questions of like, okay, well, which pollutant do you want to work with? And do you need near real time, or do you need like a longer term data set? And what sort of time scale you're looking at? To guide them on these questions to get to the data set that they want, as well as to get them to resources that are relevant to that. So we're always looking for things like that to help make it easier to get started. Likewise, Jennifer also developed this tutorial for working with satellite data in Google Earth Engine. And kind of like what Tracey was saying with the tutorials, this is a great way to sort of get this into the hands of people so that they can use it. And we're also always looking for ways that listening to stakeholders and saying, well, how would you like to use this data? What format works best for you? Because sometimes there's an expectation of like, oh, well, here's the data, you can just download it. And that's not always easy for people to do. They may not necessarily have the coding experience or the computational resources. So we're always trying to think about different ways of getting the data into the hands of people who want it. So as part of our sort of overarching team role, we also are always trying to increase the visibility of research and bringing these different stakeholders together. I mentioned that there's different roles, but there's also different interests from the health, the air quality side, and sort of as a diplomacy thing, these are groups that might not necessarily have opportunities to work with each other in a friendly environment because they can be very adversarial. And so this is sort of a neutral way of sort of bringing all of this information together through HACAS. And so we're also always trying to communicate this out. We have resources on our website. We sort of communicate out the sort of one-way communication of newsletters, which ends up being two-way, as Tracey realizes when we get all these responses back. And then we've also developed a forum to try and keep that engagement going online and sort of make it more so that anyone can access it and sort of see the types of conversations, because often people have the same kinds of questions. So with that, I'll highlight, these are the ways that we're building dialogue. The key thing, of course, is to listen, but sort of creating these collaborative environments, having the ability to pivot on projects that match the stakeholder timescales, whether that's a rapid project or a longer term, creating the venues for people to talk and collaborate, delivering those resources, communicating regularly. These are very key. And so with that, I'd like to invite you, if you're interested, you can always come to one of our meetings. Our next one is in Massachusetts. These are hybrid, so you can also access it online. So the next one will be in June. And it's free and open to the public. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Jenny. Questions? Brett?
I have more of a comment. I think as an example of the success of the approach, the Salt Lake City HACAS meeting, 30% of the people at that meeting, it was their first time at the meeting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it is really, and they were, for the most part, they were stakeholders.
Yeah.
So I think that's great.
Thanks. Yeah, well, Brad's super active in that and leading some of our initiatives. And the initiatives go from being very technical, like some of the ones that Brad are leading, to being more developing tutorials and outreach stuff. So it's nice to see the range. Any other questions for Jenny? Okay, Well, I think you've gotten a whirlwind tour of some of the work that we're doing. Thank you for coming, and hope to see you at HU or a future seminar. Thank you.